I never thought that after losing my husband, my son would be so quick to cast me aside. A week after Martin's funeral, my son Brian texted me, "Start packing. We're selling the house." No phone call, no knock at the door, just a text, as if 30 years of memories could be shoved into a box and carted off like old winter coats. I stared at the screen for a long time. The coffee I'd brewed had gone cold in my hand. I wasn't even sure I was breathing. That message, it landed harder than the hymns at the funeral. Harder than the look on Brian's face when he gave that sterile eulogy. He had rehearsed grief. But this was real. Cold. Final. Not even a, "How are you doing, Mom?" Just, "Start packing." I didn't reply. Not right away. I read the words over and over, like maybe they'd rearrange themselves into something softer if I stared long enough. They didn't. Instead, I got up, my legs unsteady, and walked down the hallway to Martin's study. The smell of his aftershave still lingered on the leather of his office chair. I pressed my palm to the back of it, like I could summon him. My eyes burned, but I didn't cry. Not yet. I sat, and for the first time in a week, I let myself think. Not about the casseroles piling in the freezer, not about the empty side of the bed, but about that text. Brian didn't ask. He decided. And that's when it hit me. He thinks the house is his. He thinks now that Martin's gone, I'm just an old woman squatting in real estate he's entitled to. How long had he been waiting? The dirt on Martin's grave hadn't even settled. I thought back to the day we bought this house. I was 7 months pregnant with Brian. Martin had walked me through every room, his hand at the small of my back, talking about the Christmas mornings we'd have here, the garden I could plant, the fireplace we'd sit in front of when we got old. We grew old together, Martin and I. But apparently, I didn't grow useful. That message wasn't just about real estate. It was about erasing me from a life I built. A quiet eviction wrapped in digital shorthand. I closed my eyes and leaned back. The chair creaked under me. I remembered something Martin said a few months before he died. "If anything happens to me, Helen, don't let them rush you. You have more power than you think." At the time, I didn't understand. I thought he was being sentimental. But now, I wasn't so sure. I opened the bottom drawer of his desk, the one he always kept locked but had left ajar before the hospital. Inside were neatly stacked folders, each labeled in Martin's handwriting. One read, "Estate. Private." My fingers hovered, but I didn't open it. Not yet. Not because I was afraid, but because I was no longer rushing. They wanted me to pack. Maybe I would. Just not what they expected. I stood slowly, ran my hand along the bookshelf, and steadied myself. Then I picked up my phone and typed 3 words back to Brian. "Thanks for the update." I didn't give him anger. I gave him confusion. Let him wonder what I meant. Because that was the moment I changed, from a grieving widow into a woman ready to reclaim her power. And no one, not even my own son, was going to see it coming. I sat in the kitchen, the same chair I'd sat in every morning for the last 30 years. Steam curled from the mug in my hand. World's best grandma, faded from the dishwasher. Amber gave it to me years ago, back when she used to run into my arms. Before she stopped calling. The silence in the house wasn't comforting. It was surgical. Precise. The kind of silence that follows a betrayal so sharp, your body can't even process the sound yet. I stared at the hallway. Martin used to hum when he walked it. Always barefoot. Always stopping to kiss the back of my neck if I was chopping onions or stirring soup. Now there was nothing. Just the quiet ticking of the old stove clock and the sound of the steam slowly dying. I didn't touch my coffee. My hands were too tight. Not from sadness. From restraint. I replayed the last few months. The little comments. "This place must be a lot to take care of. You know, the market's hot right now." Rachel's tight-lipped smiles over dinner. Her faux sympathy. The way she stopped bringing Amber to visit after Martin passed. And then the worst part. I heard them. Last night. I hadn't meant to. They were in the den, thinking I was asleep upstairs. But I couldn't sleep. I never sleep anymore. My body still turns to reach for Martin at 2 a.m. I had come downstairs for warm milk, barefoot like he used to be. And I heard it. "She's barely functioning," Rachel said. Brian didn't respond, just sighed. I looked into facilities. Somewhere near us. They're clean, safe. She can sell the house, cover the cost. She'd hate it, Brian said. Quiet, hesitant. Rachel snorted. She'll adjust. Eventually, they all do. I backed up the stairs, knees trembling. Not with fear, with rage. They weren't just trying to take my home. They were plotting to lock me away like a broken heirloom. They weren't worried about me. They were embarrassed by me. And they were making plans to make me disappear. Politely. That was the moment the fury hardened into resolve. They thought I was powerless. They thought Martin's death ended the chapter. They hadn't read the fine print. I sipped my now cold coffee, set it down with steady hands, and walked back to the study. The phone started ringing again the next morning. I let it go to voicemail. By noon, there were 5 missed calls. 2 from Brian, 1 from Rachel, 1 from Megan, my niece, the real estate agent I hadn't heard from in months, and 1 from a number I didn't recognize. Probably a friendly buyer. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. By dinner time, a new voicemail from Brian. Mom, it's a big house. Too much for you. Let's talk about options, okay? Maybe Amber can still go to that private college if we handle this right. Amber's tuition. It wasn't even subtle. They didn't say it, but the message was loud. You've had your time. Now move aside. It was like watching my life be turned into a hand-me-down jacket, something they could wear, resell, or toss, depending on the season. Rachel sent a follow-up text. We're all just trying to be practical. This isn't an attack. Funny how people always say it's not an attack when they're the ones swinging. I didn't respond. I didn't call Susan Blake, the attorney, right away. First, I went back to Martin's study. It had always been his room. Even when he'd invite me in to sit beside him and go over the taxes or read the Sunday Times, I knew it was sacred space. I didn't dust his desk. I didn't rearrange his drawers. I didn't touch his files. But that morning, I stepped inside like it was mine. The carpet had flattened under his chair. The blinds let in slanted stripes of light across the bookshelves, dustier now, untouched for weeks. I opened the filing cabinet gently, one drawer at a time. I was looking for nothing and everything. Behind an old manila envelope labeled 2016 tax returns, I saw it. A thick, navy blue folder, the kind with the leather corners. It had no label. Inside, copies of account statements, property summaries, and a letter in Martin's unmistakable hand. Strong strokes, clean letters, no hesitation. Helen, this isn't just about protecting you. It's about trusting you. If you're reading this, I'm gone. And I'm sorry for that. But I couldn't leave you defenseless. I've watched how they've changed. They love our money more than they love our memories. I took steps. He went on to explain the structure of the living trust, the retirement accounts, the private checking in my name, the fact that Brian and Rachel had no legal claim to any of it. Then one line, written in blue ink, underlined twice. No matter what they say, you don't owe them anything. My throat tightened. It was so Martin, plain-spoken, gentle, iron-willed. He had always hated conflict. But when it came to protecting me, he didn't blink. And then, folded behind the folder, something new, something strange, a pamphlet from a luxury condo building in Miami. Tucked inside was a letter from a real estate firm, addressed to Martin, dated last year. I read it twice to believe it. He'd bought me a condo. Not just looked into it, not dreamed of it, bought it, paid in full, in my name, furnished, managed. A little place by Biscayne Bay, with ocean views and a building manager named Mrs. Alvarez. I sat there stunned, the paper warm in my hands from my grip. Martin had never said a word. Not once. I thought back to last October, when he surprised me with a weekend in Vermont and told me, if I could give you peace in your pocket, I would. I guess this was that pocket. I pulled the condo brochure closer. Pale blue walls, white tile floors, a tiny balcony with a wrought iron railing, and a hibiscus plant hanging from a hook. There was even a small photograph of the kitchen. It looked nothing like our kitchen here. It looked like peace. And below the brochure, another envelope. It was sealed. The date on the front? Today's date. In his handwriting. Months before he passed, he had timed it. Inside, a simple note. If you've made it this far, it means you're awake now. I waited until sunset before I made the call. Susan Blake's name was still in Martin's address book. Not in his phone. He'd never liked typing on those tiny screens, but in his leather-bound planner, written in that careful script of his. Susan Blake, estate planning, 9 years, trusted, discreet. The phone rang twice before she answered. Susan Blake speaking. Her voice was smooth, practiced, the kind of voice that had said hard truths to grieving families, and still managed to sound like a promise. "Hello," I said. "My name is Helen Brooks. I believe you were my husband Martin's attorney." A pause, then warmth. "Helen, I've been expecting your call. He left instructions that you'd reach out. How can I help?" I told her I found the trust. The Miami condo. The bank card. The letter. Susan didn't sound surprised. "He did everything by the book, Helen. You're the sole owner of all properties and accounts. He removed the children from all documents 3 years ago. He was, how do I put it, realistic." That word sat heavy on my chest. Realistic. He knew. Before I did. Before I was willing to admit it. I made an appointment to come in the following week. Susan offered to come to me, but I wanted to go to her. I needed the ritual of it. The formality. The act of walking into a law office not as a victim, but as the legal owner of my own life. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet again. But this time, it didn't feel so hollow. It felt loaded, like the stillness before a storm you finally choose to walk through. The next day, I started small. I went to the bedroom and took out my documents: birth certificate, social security card, passport, medical records. I organized them into a clean leather folder. Then the bank files. I double-checked account numbers against what Martin left. Everything aligned. He'd labeled the folders in a way only he would. Helen, Shield, Helen, Freedom, Helen, just in case. I found myself smiling. Not with joy, with recognition. This man didn't just love me. He prepared for war on my behalf. I went to the closet and picked out the suit I hadn't worn since Martin's retirement party. Navy. Clean lines. Still fit. I folded it gently, placed it in a suitcase. I wasn't leaving yet, but I wanted to be ready. They'd asked me to start packing, so I did, but not the way they expected. I packed strategically, quietly, like someone who'd been underestimated for too long. And I said nothing. When Brian called the next day to say, "We're coming by this weekend to look at the garage," I simply said, "Sure." When Rachel asked, "Do you want us to help you pack up anything sentimental?" I replied, "That's kind of you." They thought I was being agreeable, but what I was doing was observing, watching how easily they moved around my home, claiming, prodding, preparing it for their own use. I watched Brian point at the living room wall. "We'll probably knock that out. Open the space a bit." Rachel took measurements. "Amber could have this room." No one asked me what I wanted. Not once. That night, I stood in Martin's study, looking out the window at the moonlight on the lawn. They thought I was done, but the truth was, I'd just started. Susan's office sat on the 3rd floor of a modest brick building downtown, the kind with frosted glass doors and that clean, polished scent of lemon oil and law. It was the first place I'd walked into in years where I didn't feel like someone's afterthought. "Mrs. Brooks," the receptionist said warmly, "Susan's expecting you." She met me in the doorway, small, sharp eyes behind delicate glasses. She looked like the kind of woman who never missed a single word in a contract. "Come in, Helen," she said, gesturing to a seat across her desk. "I've got everything ready." She pulled out a thick binder, Martin's name embossed in gold lettering, and opened to a tab labeled Final Protections. "He was meticulous," she said, flipping pages. "The trust is solid. No probate. No room for contest. He made sure you wouldn't be touched." I listened carefully. The words made sense. The relief should have settled me, but it didn't. I kept waiting for the catch. For the however, but there was none. Then Susan paused, tapping a separate folder. "There's more." I sat up straighter. "He didn't just protect your home. He moved all accounts. Checking, savings, retirement, into your name. Removed the kids from every deed, every beneficiary form. When? I asked. 3 years ago. I blinked. That long? She nodded. He said they were already changing. He didn't want to believe it at first, but after a few family dinners, he made the decision. Family dinners. I remembered them. Rachel's tight smiles. Brian's rehearsed praise, always, just after Martin offered to pay for something. He told me once, Susan continued, that he hoped he was wrong, but he'd rather be wrong and prepared than right and helpless. I swallowed hard. And the condo? She smiled. Yes, the Miami property is yours outright. Bought last summer. He said he planned to surprise you when you were ready to start breathing again. I couldn't speak. Susan slid the final envelope across the table. There's something else. He left this with instructions to give it to you on the day of our meeting. I opened it slowly. Inside, a small letter and a sleek silver bank card. $50,000, Susan explained. In a private account. His note called it your Independence Fund. No ties, no reporting, just yours. I read the letter quietly. Martin's handwriting was steady, confident. If you're holding this, Helen, it means you made it past the first storm. This is for the second. For the choice. For your freedom. Not for groceries. Not for guilt. Use it to move, or to fight, or to start again. But whatever you do, don't ask permission. I folded the note carefully and tucked it back inside. I can't believe he kept all this from me, I whispered. He didn't keep it from you, Susan said softly. He gave it to you when you were ready to hold it. I stared at her. I think he knew that grief fogs everything, she added. But once you could see clearly, he wanted you to see everything. I nodded, my fingers tightening around the folder. Susan pushed a final document across the table. This is just a written affirmation of your sole ownership. I'll keep a copy here, but this one's yours to carry. I took it with both hands. When I walked out of that office, I wasn't light. I wasn't euphoric. I was steady. And that was better. I didn't call Brian. I didn't text Rachel. I didn't change my tone. Instead, I walked to a nearby cafe, ordered a black coffee, and sat by the window, watching people pass. They had no idea what I'd just done, and neither did my son. But soon, they would. 2 days later, Brian texted me again. Mom, Greg's client wants to close in 2 weeks. Can you be out by then? No. Are you okay? No. How are you holding up since Dad's funeral? Just the deadline. I sat at the kitchen table, his message glowing on the screen beside Martin's mug, property of grumpy old man. I had kept it out of habit, not sentiment. But now, it felt like a line drawn in ceramic. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a long moment. I knew what they expected. Panic, stalling, maybe a soft protest. But I gave them none of that. I typed, I'll be out by next Friday. It took less than 10 seconds for the typing bubbles to appear. Really? That's amazing. Thank you, Mom. This will make things so much easier. Easier. That word again. Easier for them. Simpler for them. I closed the text thread and opened a browser instead. It took me less than 5 minutes to hire the moving company. Not to pack my things. To pack theirs. There was still a garage full of Brian's high school trophies. His first bicycle helmet. Boxes of college books that Rachel said she might resell someday. And the piano. That old upright Martin and I paid for when Amber wanted lessons. Lessons she gave up after 6 weeks. They'd left it all here like this was still their home. Like I was the housekeeper of their childhood. So I made a list. Brian's boxes, labeled and stacked. Rachel's wedding china, never picked up, wrapped in bubble wrap. The piano, polished. The bench stuffed with old sheet music, each item tagged and ready for delivery. I didn't touch Martin's things. Those would come with me. Quietly, carefully. I called the moving company. Gave them 2 addresses, Brian's and Rachel's. I told them exactly what to take, exactly what to say. When you drop it off, tell them it's from Helen Brooks. Say, she thought you'd want to keep these memories safe. Then leave. The man on the phone paused, then said, Yes, ma'am, we'll make it respectful. That evening, I started my own packing. But not in boxes. I packed a carry-on with what mattered: Martin's letters, our wedding album, my documents, the folder from Susan, a small jewelry pouch with my mother's ring, and the sapphire necklace Martin gave me on our 30th anniversary. I didn't touch the dishes, the furniture, the paintings on the wall. They could keep the shell. I was taking the soul. I walked from room to room like a curator, saying farewell. Not with grief, with authority. This was no longer a negotiation. This was an execution of my own plan. I stood in the middle of the living room, the one Rachel said she'd open up, and looked around one last time. Then I whispered it into the quiet. You think I'm leaving empty-handed? You have no idea. That night, Rachel texted a photo of a backsplash tile. Thinking of something like this for the kitchen. Thoughts? I stared at the screen, then deleted the message without replying. She thought she was preparing to move in. She didn't know she was about to receive her old wine glasses and a pink crocheted baby blanket she forgot she left in the attic. The house was still for the first time in days. Not quiet. Still. The kind of stillness that settles after you make a decision that cannot be undone. I stood in Martin's study again, my hand resting on the back of his chair. The leather was worn, but still held the faintest scent of his aftershave. I used to joke that the chair smelled more like him than his old flannel pajamas. I sat down slowly, the folder from Susan Blake open in front of me. All the legal proof I needed was stacked in tidy, stapled piles. Trust documents, deeds, financial account summaries. My name. Only my name. They couldn't touch a dime. Couldn't sell a door hinge without me. But even with all that paper armor, something inside me still ached. I thought of Amber. The last time she ran through this hallway barefoot, she was 7, chocolate on her face, chasing a butterfly she swore lived behind the curtains. Now she barely looked up from her phone when I visited. If I visited, I remembered holding her hand in the waiting room the day Rachel cried over Amber's preschool tuition, how I quietly pulled out a check, pretending it was no big deal. Later, it was braces, then summer camp, then dance costumes, always a little short this month, always presented with a smile, and a guilt-wrapped bow. I wrote every check without complaint. And now, I wondered, had they ever told her? Did Amber know that Nana paid for her dreams while her parents remodeled kitchens and took ski trips? I doubted it. And that's when it hit me like a slap. My love had become currency. And when the currency ran out, or when they thought it would, they stopped seeing the woman behind it. I picked up the check stubs from an old folder. I'd kept them, not for proof, but for memory, for the moments when I'd felt useful, part of something. Now they just looked like receipts from a transaction I never agreed to. I got up and opened the closet in the study. Martin's things were still there. His sweater, the navy one he wore when he raked the leaves every fall. I wrapped it in tissue and placed it in my carry-on. Then I saw the box, Amber's box. Inside, macaroni crafts, finger paintings, birthday cards addressed in crayon. To Nana, who makes the best cookies. I held one in my hand, stared at the uneven letters. I had loved her without condition. Would she ever see that? Or would she only remember what her parents told her? The thought tightened in my throat. But no matter what Brian and Rachel said, no matter what story they spun about me downsizing or needing help, I had my own record, my own story. I was going to leave it behind in the only way that mattered, with dignity and a mirror. The movers were scheduled for Friday. The condo in Miami was waiting. Mrs. Alvarez had emailed to say the place had been aired out, fresh linens put in, and orchids placed on the windowsill. Martin had chosen it with me in mind. I would plant new roots where the sun reached the floor by noon, and no one asked me to move out of my own life. But for now, I stood in the middle of the home I built, with calloused hands, aching feet, and a heart full of things no one had paid for. And I whispered something that wasn't quite a goodbye. This was never just a house. This was my witness. The first crack in Rachel's confidence came on a Tuesday morning. She called instead of texting. That alone told me something had shifted. "Hi, Helen," she said, too sweet, too rehearsed. I waited. "We've been thinking," she continued. "You know about your living situation, about your comfort." I said nothing. "So," she pushed on, "Brian and I had this idea. What if we finished the basement at our place? We could build you a kitchenette, a private bathroom, even your own entrance. It would be like an in-law suite, your own space. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't tremble. I wasn't surprised. I'd been waiting for this script. Rachel, the problem solver, the martyr, the benevolent planner. I took a slow sip of coffee. Then I asked, calmly, "When was the last time you called just to check on me?" Silence. "I mean," I added, "a call that wasn't about the house, or Amber's tuition, or your schedule. A call just to ask how I was doing." She stammered. Well, life's been hectic." "I see." She tried again, more nervous now. "It's just, we don't want you to feel like a burden." There it was. That word. Again. Burden. I wanted to laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. That was their fear. Not that I'd fall, or struggle, or be lonely, but that I'd linger, take up space, interrupt the neat picture of their perfect home and curated life. "I appreciate the offer," I said finally. "Really?" She perked up. "I appreciate it," I repeated. "But I'm not interested." Another pause. "You'd have everything you need," she said, trying to keep her voice light. "Privacy, stability, family." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on Martin's desk. "Rachel," I said, quiet and even, "I don't want stability. I want freedom. And I'm not looking for a basement to die in." She inhaled sharply. "That's not fair." "No," I said. "What's not fair is that you think I should feel grateful for being offered a corner of your house like a rescued dog." Her tone changed. Tighter. "We're trying to help." "No," I said again. "You're trying to contain me." Another long silence. Then, finally, "I'm not sure what you want, Helen. I want you to stop pretending this is about concern. It's about convenience. You want the house, and you don't want me in the way." "That's not true." "It is," I said gently. "And it's okay that you've made your choice. But now you're going to see what happens when I make mine." She tried to pivot, offense to defense. "I just don't want this to get ugly." I smiled. It wasn't kind. "Then you should have been nicer to the woman who owns the deed." Click. She hung up first. I stared at the phone a moment longer, then set it down beside the folder with my name embossed across the front. It felt like chess. She'd opened with a polished pawn. I just moved my queen. And I wasn't bluffing. I walked back into Susan Blake's office the next morning with the same steady steps I used to take in church. There was something sacred about knowing your life was finally yours again. She greeted me with a nod, her eyes sharper this time. She could tell the game had shifted. "They're pushing, aren't they?" she asked. "They've started using words like burden and basement," I said, sitting down. Susan smiled grimly. "That's when the kindness turns to control." I opened my purse and laid out the text messages. Brian's requests, Rachel's updates, the voicemail about closing dates, and making it easier for everyone. I placed them neatly on her desk, each one a breadcrumb leading to their intent. "Can they force a sale if I refuse to sign?" I asked. Susan didn't hesitate. "No," she said firmly. "They can't sell what they don't own. And Martin made damn sure they don't own a single tile of that house." I let out a slow breath, not relief, exactly, but confirmation, like a lock clicking into place. "The trust names you as sole beneficiary," she continued. "The house, the accounts, the Miami property, it's all yours, without contest. Martin revoked their rights 3 years ago. They can't claim a thing." I leaned back, crossing my hands over my lap. "Do they know that?" I asked. Susan's eyes glinted. "Not yet, but I can draft a formal statement, if you're ready." I thought of Rachel's voice, sugar-dipped and slicing. I thought of Brian's texts, short, transactional, like I was an item on a closing checklist. I nodded. "Good," she said, already pulling out a fresh document. "And Susan," I added, my voice low but certain, "I want it printed and delivered in person, not emailed, not mailed, hand-delivered, to Brian, at work." She paused, a smile tugging at the edge of her mouth. "You're sure?" "I want him to open it at his desk," I said. I want him to feel it. We worked through the wording. Simple, legal, final, per the terms of Martin Brooks' irrevocable trust. All assets, including the primary residence, are solely owned by Helen Brooks. No third party has authority to list, negotiate, or transfer said property. Any attempts to do so will be considered fraudulent and subject to legal action. She placed the final copy into a crisp white envelope. No frills, no flourish, just truth. As she handed it to her assistant for delivery, Susan looked back at me. "You're calm," she said. "I've never felt calmer," I replied. They've been speaking their truth for weeks. It's time I spoke mine. Outside, the sun was sharp on the pavement, the kind of August light that casts everything in contrast. You can't hide in that kind of brightness. It exposes. I stopped at the cafe again, the same one I'd sat in after our last meeting. I ordered black coffee, no cream, no sugar. I didn't want soft edges. While I sipped, I imagined the moment Brian would open the envelope. The confusion, the flush of realization, the slow descent from assumed control to powerlessness. It wouldn't be rage. Not yet. It would be panic. Because that's what happens when a man who thought he inherited everything learns he inherited nothing. And maybe then, he'd think back to the woman who made his birthday cakes from scratch, who sat beside him in hospital waiting rooms, who never asked for anything except to be respected. Maybe then he'd wonder what changed. And maybe, just maybe, he'd realize he did. By Friday morning, the air in the house felt different. Not lighter, just still, like something had taken its last breath. I stood at the edge of the bedroom, suitcase open on the bed, and for the first time in weeks, I packed for me. No heirlooms, no linens, no boxes marked Brian's childhood art projects, just what mattered. Martin's letters, the good jewelry, the navy suit I wore to his retirement party, a paperback I'd been meaning to read for 3 years, my passport, and the folder. The one that held everything they didn't see coming. I didn't cry. I didn't pace. I didn't second guess. I had called Mrs. Alvarez that afternoon. Her voice was warm and efficient. "Yes, Mrs. Brooks," she said, in her careful English. "Everything is ready. The condo has been cleaned. The plants are watered. I left the keys at the front desk for you." And then softer, "He spoke of you often. Said the place would make you feel strong again." I sat with that for a long time. Strong again. Not safe. Not stable. Not settled. Strong. They always thought I was fragile. Because I was quiet. Because I never raised my voice. Because I didn't bark or slam doors or fight in public. But quiet women aren't weak. We're just measuring, watching, waiting. And when we act, we don't ask permission. I called a small real estate office Martin once used to lease a workshop space. I remembered the name because he liked the woman who ran it. "No nonsense," he'd said. "The kind who reads the fine print and tells you when you're being dumb." Her name was Joanne. When I called, she remembered Martin immediately. "God, that man loved a good pen," she chuckled. "He signed everything with a fountain." "So do I said. "Must be contagious." I didn't tell her about Brian, or Rachel, or the vultures circling. I just said I needed the house listed discreetly. No signs, no public open houses, private showings only. She understood immediately. By Thursday we had 2 offers, both full price, but one came with a letter. It was from a young couple, newly married, expecting their first baby. The woman wrote about the garden, how she could picture planting lavender under the kitchen window. The man mentioned the fireplace and how it reminded him of his grandfather's cabin. They didn't just see square footage, they saw a home. That's who I sold it to. Joanne handled the closing like a sniper. Quick, clean, confidential. The paperwork was in Susan Blake's hands before Brian ever noticed the house was off the market. I arranged for the moving truck to arrive an hour before I left for the airport. They hauled out the boxes I'd labeled Brian, fragile, Rachel, kitchen, Amber, memory box. I gave them 2 addresses. I asked them to deliver with this message. "These were left behind by Helen Brooks. She thought you might want them returned. She's no longer at this address." That morning, As I locked the front door for the last time, Joanne texted, "Closing complete. Wire transferred. You're officially free, Ms. Brooks." I stood on the porch where Martin used to sit with his morning paper. The sun was rising, casting long gold shadows across the lawn. The magnolia tree was in bloom. It was the last thing I looked at before I turned away. At the airport, I kept checking my phone. Not for doubts, but for fallout. I expected Brian's fury, Rachel's confusion, but nothing came. Not yet. They were probably still in shock. Or denial. Or still assuming this was all a joke I'd reverse before the weekend. But it wasn't. This wasn't a cry for attention. It wasn't a message. It was a move. I boarded the plane with my carry-on, Martin's sweater tucked over my lap like a shield. I didn't cry when the wheels left the ground. I didn't even blink. Because I wasn't escaping. I was arriving. When the plane landed in Miami, I turned my phone on. One message blinked on the screen, from Brian. "Where are you? The movers just dropped off our stuff. Is this some kind of punishment?" I stared at it for a long moment. Then I replied, "This is closure. The house was never yours. Now you can stop pretending it was." No response. That was the first silence I enjoyed in a long, long time. Brian showed up on Saturday, dressed for war, navy blazer, leather folder tucked under his arm, that same tight jaw he wore at Martin's funeral, like the world owed him something just for showing up. But this time, he wasn't walking into a church pew. He was walking into a storm of his own making. I watched from across the street, tucked in Joanne's car. She offered to drive me by, one last time, for closure. We parked beneath the shade of an old elm. Windows cracked, air warm and humming. He stepped out of his SUV, eyes scanning the lawn. The truck was already gone. The porch was bare. The windows empty. The sold sign staked clean into the grass. Red letters bold and final. He stopped mid-step, stared. The manila folder in his hand dipped slightly. Joanne whispered beside me, "You want to go?" I shook my head. "Not yet." He walked to the door, knocked twice, rang the bell, waited. When no one came, he stepped back and looked around. That's when I opened my door. He turned. His mouth parted like he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. "Mom?" I stepped out of the car. Calm, steady, purse in one hand. Martin's sweater draped over my arm like armor. "Brian." He blinked. "What the hell is going on?" I kept walking until we stood face to face at the edge of the lawn. Not on the porch. That wasn't mine anymore. He gestured toward the house. "Is this a joke? You sold the house? Without telling me?" "No," I said. "I sold my house. The one Martin left in my name." He laughed, a dry, desperate sound. "You didn't even talk to us. You didn't talk to me when you decided I should be out in 2 weeks," I said. "You sent a text, like I was a tenant. Or a problem." He opened the folder in his hands. Printouts, listings, emails. I had a buyer lined up, Greg's client. We had a plan. "No," I said again. "You had a plan. One that didn't include me." He shoved the folder closed. "You can't just give away our stuff." "The piano? Amber's things?" "I didn't give anything away," I said. "I returned them. To their owners." "You should have talked to me," he snapped. "I tried," I said, voice cool. "Every birthday, every Sunday dinner, every quiet moment I spent asking how you were, when all you saw in me was a placeholder until you could start renovating." He flinched. I pulled a card from my purse. Susan Blake's. "Any concerns? Take it up with my attorney." He didn't take it. "I'm your son," he said, his voice low now. Less anger, more disbelief. I nodded. "And I'm your mother. But you forgot that when you let your wife speak for both of you. When you planned your future with my past." A silence fell between us, dense and bitter. He looked smaller somehow, not younger, just less certain. "You're just going to walk away?" he asked. "No," I said, and I meant it. "I already walked. You're just now noticing." He opened his mouth again, but I turned, walked back toward Joanne's car. I didn't slam the door, didn't look back. He was still standing there when we drove away, still holding that folder full of plans that had no space for me. plans he would now have to rewrite from scratch. He showed up again the next day, this time at Susan Blake's office. She called me in advance. He made a scene in the lobby, demanded to speak to someone. I told him I'd arrange a proper appointment. He's coming at 2 o'clock. I didn't hesitate. I'll be there. When I arrived, he was already pacing the hallway. Tie loosened, face red, hair a mess. A grown man who had just learned that the inheritance he built his future around was no longer waiting for him. He didn't even see me at first. I stepped through the doorway, closed the door behind me gently. He turned. "You really went through with it?" I did. "And you think this is fair?" I looked at him, really looked at him. His posture, the lines in his forehead, the rage in his voice. None of it belonged to the boy who used to bring me dandelions in a sweaty fist. This man had a mortgage, a daughter, a wife with opinions and expectations, and a fantasy of what I was supposed to leave behind for him. "Do you want to know what's fair?" I said, reaching into my bag. "Let's talk about fair." I pulled out a copy of the will, Martin's original, the one Susan gave me in the first meeting. I handed it to him. He looked down at it, confused. "I've already seen this," he said. "No," I replied. "You've seen pieces. You've seen what you wanted to see. Read this." He flipped through the first few pages, skimming, still defensive, still waiting for the loophole, until he reached page 7. The paragraph was highlighted in yellow. Martin's own handwriting had circled it in blue ink. "All properties, financial accounts, and real estate assets are to remain solely in the possession of Helen Brooks. No child or descendant shall inherit claim or control unless expressly stated by Helen Brooks in writing." He stared at it. The color drained from his face like a slow spill. "You forged this." I laughed. Not cruelly, but the way a woman laughs when she's too tired to scream. "You really think I forged a legal document, had it notarized, reviewed by 2 attorneys, and built a trust around it, just to spite you?" His mouth opened. Nothing came out. "I didn't lie to you," I said gently. "I let you tell yourself a story." He dropped the folder into a chair. "Why? Why would he cut us out like that?" I looked him in the eye. Steady. "He didn't cut you out. You walked out. Every time you made a decision about me without asking. Every time Rachel treated me like a placeholder. Every time you nodded along. He saw it. And he protected me the way you should have." Brian sank into the chair, shoulders caved in. Like a man who'd finally stopped pretending the foundation was still holding. "Amber," he said, his voice small. "She was counting on. Amber still has me." I interrupted. "But not like this. Not with silence and conditions and guilt behind every dollar." His hands were shaking now. "Do you hate me?" he asked. I let the question sit between us. I owed him the truth. "No," I said. "I don't hate you. But I don't owe you my life, Brian. And I sure as hell don't owe you my house." Susan walked in quietly. Professional. Kind. "Mr. Brooks," she said, "everything is legally closed. This meeting is a courtesy." He stood up slowly, nodded, but his face was empty. I walked out before him. Because this wasn't a court. It was a reckoning. And I had already won. The condo was small, but it breathed. Every morning, the sun poured through the east windows like a gentle promise. No creaking floorboards, no echo of someone else's footsteps, just me. And silence, but not the cold kind. The kind I used to sit in back home, while Brian and Rachel whispered in the next room about nursing homes and square footage. This silence was warm, earned, chosen. The air smelled faintly of orchids. Mrs. Alvarez had placed 3 along the kitchen windowsill, pink, white, and 1 deep violet. "For luck," she'd said. I didn't need luck. I had freedom. I unpacked slowly over the next few days. Not because I had too much. I'd only brought what mattered. But because I wasn't rushing anymore. There was no one waiting for me to hurry up. No one tracking my movements like a shared calendar event. I hung one picture, Martin and me, standing outside the house in our 20s. Me in my gardening gloves, him in that ridiculous kiss-the-cook apron. We weren't wealthy then. Just stubborn, determined to make something beautiful out of ordinary days.